Dear friends, thank you very much for being with us today. Nicholas Bournelis of Capital Link. I have to say I am delighted that it's early in the morning and we have a packed room. So really quite a great start. I would like to introduce Clay Maitland, who is the conference chairman, and Clay will kick off our event. I'm really happy that this event is focusing on what I think is the backbone of the shipping industry, the operational side of the business. As you know, Capital Link is organizing a number of events, and most of our events are finance and investment oriented. But this event talks about best industry practices across all areas of operations: environment, crewing, human resources, innovation, fleet management, safety and security, and so on. And I think that it's a great opportunity to focus on what makes shipping run. Sometimes, when we focus on operations, we focus when something doesn't go well, and we don't really. And now we have the opportunity to focus on the operational side of the business and see how well it runs and how it makes the industry be a sustainable industry. Anyway, I will not speak for much longer. I will ask Clay to come and kick off the event. This event started 7 years ago. We have done it in London for the first 6 years. Now we move it to Athens. We started the event with the endorsement of Clay. We started this event as a corporate social responsibility event in shipping. And when we started it as such, I think a number of people had a hard time talking about corporate social responsibility in shipping. So when we shifted from that and we said, really what we're talking about operational excellence, then everybody said, of course, that's what we do every day. If we're not good at what we do, we would not be here today. So we shifted the focus, and instead of calling it corporate social responsibility, we call it operational excellence in shipping, which allows us to have a broader topic. So Clay, please come and take over. And actually, he is the one who pioneered this idea, and we got it executed.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Evaristo, Kalimata, good morning. Welcome. You may wonder why someone from New York is actually chairing a conference here in Athens, and sometimes I wonder too, but I have been attending conferences of this kind since 1976, the first time that I came to Posidonia, and so it's been a long time. And we've seen a lot of changes. If I may just try to set the tone, first of all, I would like to thank Nick Bournelis, who you just heard from, Annie, Eleni Bai, and Olga Bournosi for the work that they have done to make this conference happen and be a success after all these years. This has become one of the most important gatherings of shipping professionals and members of the industry in Europe, and certainly here in Athens. We have a very distinguished group of panelists during the course of the day. It's very impressive, and I think that I hope that you will be provoked, not only as participants, but as members of our audience, to ask questions. I am very fond of quoting or referring to my favorite Greek philosopher of classical times, Heraclitus, the great founder of metaphysics, who was known for saying he would have done very well nowadays because he could speak in sound bites. And one of his famous sound bites was, all things change. I always like to joke that one day he was in the Agora out here, which is still there, and along came somebody with the usual camera crew and said, can you give us a quick summary of your philosophy? And Heraclitus is supposed to have said, of course I'm embellishing a great deal, but he said, all things change. You never put your foot in or your toe in the same river twice, because everything is changing around us. And that's certainly been true of our industry. I think change is probably going to be the dominant overriding theme of today's conference. Certainly for me, a few years ago, attending one of these conferences that Nick just referred to on corporate social responsibility, and indeed on the technology of the industry, which is going to also be a dominant theme today, we never heard very much about liquid natural gas as a fuel, as bunkers. Cargo, yes, perhaps, but not as a fuel. And I can remember asking someone from the audience about the possibility of bunkering with an LNG and being told, well, that's not going to happen for another 50 or 60 years because we don't have bunkering facilities, we're not about to build them. Well, you still hear that in some places, but it is rapidly becoming evident that one of the greatest transformations in the industry is the change in the way ships are actually propelled. The engines, the fueling, the bunkering, as I say, all are being influenced by the other great change that we are witnessing, which we will hear from a number of panels about, which is what might be called the green revolution, the effect of regulation on particularly with regard to emissions and ballast water, and how that is affecting how ships are not only designed, but how they are operated. We will, I think, learn quite a bit during the course of the day, and as I say, I look forward to learning with you. I'm going to be bobbing back and forth because I think I'm moderating the first panel, but thank you again for coming, Kalimera. And thank you, Evaristo. I join with you in thanking our organizers for the wonderful work that they have done. Enjoy your day.
If we can have our panelists join us. By the way, I'd like to thank all the sponsors of the conference, and I'd like to thank all of those who came, who traveled to Athens to make this event a success. So I'm delighted to see the support of the classification societies, the shipping companies.
We're going to sit here.
Clay?
You can introduce us all over again. Thank you again. No, we're not. Now we are. I think that, incidentally, for the benefit of our panel, I noticed that when you speak, if you could hit the little silver panel and the light goes red, that actually means your microphone is on. At least that's the case in mine. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to introduce our panel for the first session, Industry Challenges and the Roadmap Ahead, which in a way is a microcosm of our entire conference today. On my immediate left is Apostolos Poulovassilis. Mr. Poulovassilis is the CEO of Aegean Ship Management Incorporated. On his left is Mr. Dimitrios Vastarouchas, Deputy Chief Operating Officer and Technical Director of Danaos Shipping, two very prominent and well-known companies in our industry today. To his left is Mr. Dimitris Fafalios, chairman of the technical committee of INTERCARGO, and a member of the board of the Union of Greek Shipowners, as well as, of course, president of Fafalios Shipping. To his left, and easily the tallest man, well, maybe he's not the tallest man. I think Mr. Boardley is almost the same height as Mr. Box. Mr. Box, Bill Box, who I think everybody knows, is senior managing for the commercial department and area manager for Greece and Cyprus of INTERTANKO. And finally, the ever-popular Mr. Tom Boardley, who is Executive Vice President, Global Head of Corporate and External Affairs for Lloyd's Register of Shipping. Welcome, gentlemen. Incidentally, we are slowly seeing more women in the industry. We'll say more about that later because that's something that needs to be promoted and encouraged, but it is not yet a reality, is it? We're getting there. I'm going to ask a series of questions, which I hope are the right questions. Questions that we have all discussed among ourselves because, full disclosure, for the last couple of weeks, the emails have been going back and forth. Given the very broad remit of this conference, we wanted to do a little bit of rehearsing. So if I've got it wrong, and I ask you the wrong question, I'll tell you what to do. Just answer the question you're prepared to answer and ignore me. One of the great things about moderators is you don't really have to pay too much attention to us. I'm going to start with Mr. Poulovassilis on my immediate left. Great to see you again, Apostolos. We have heard a lot about the environmental framework. What about implications of the ballast water treatment and SOx and NOx? How are owners and managers responding? This is a very broad area, I realize, but how are you as a manager and an owner responding to the burdens of the, I won't say the regulatory storm, but a lot of things are coming down the road very quickly, and that's going to be the main theme of our panel today. Tell us briefly, if you could, what you think needs to be done and what you're doing.
Okay, thank you very much, Clay. Good morning, everyone, and a big thank you to the organizers for inviting us here today. It seems to be a great agenda, and we're kicking off today, this morning, with the bigger picture and what is happening around the whole industry, and specifically, what Clay mentioned about this, what I would call also a perfect regulatory storm, which is facing us. And this in a time and in a general outlook where the industry is going to be facing slower annual growth. The industry is also facing a number of challenges in terms of increased protectionism. We've seen this with the Trump election, Brexit, more recently Catalonia. All these things are potentially negatives for our industry. And on top of that, we have this very intense and increasing environmental, societal pressure and the whole climate change discussion. So as ship owners within this whole realm of regulatory developments, we are faced with a tremendous challenge in trying to manage not only for today, but for the ships of tomorrow. And let me give you an example. We were discussing this summer about a series of new buildings. We were sitting down with the shipyard, with the designers, with the class societies, and we came up with more than 10 pages of regulations. And I think this is the only industry where we have such a big volume, let's say, of regulations. And it's not only the volume, but it's the fact that they are fragmented. And this, I think, is for me the biggest problem. We have a fragmentation of regulations. We have a number of environmental targets that we need to meet. Clay mentioned it, the ballast water, specifically looking at one aspect. We have the fuel, the global fuel sulfur cap, coming up in a couple of years. And the biggest one is further ahead with the decarbonization of the industry. And if you look at all those, let's say, 3 examples, they are, between them, contradictory. So you try to do something to tackle one of them, and you're worsening your effect on another. And I think this is what the industry needs to get a hold of. And it's not just the regulators, it's the people who actually run it, us, people in this room, to get a better dialogue, to get a more effective, let's say, collaboration on what is actually practical. Because you can't have the ship in the middle of all these pressures. To give the example of the global fuel sulfur cap, the options that we're facing are all bad options. Whether we try to switch to new fuels, which have not been tried, they haven't been analyzed, we don't know about the quality. Even today, we have big issues on fuel quality. We have scrubbers with heavy fuel oil, big capex, uncertain technology, side effects, possibly increasing OPEX. LNG. How practical is LNG on existing ships? I don't think so. So looking further ahead, if we're trying to decarbonize the industry, if we put in an interim solution today, because I think possibly LNG as a fuel is a stepping stone, it's not the end game, looking further ahead in what is the aspirations to decarbonize the industry, then you can understand that all our jobs to future-proof our ships is increasingly difficult, and so it's the problems that we're facing day in, day out. We have an investment, how do we protect it? As I said, 10 pages of regulations, this is just at the time of signing. Ship's life, you're going to get maybe another 10 pages of different regulations which need to be applied retrospectively. So you can understand that this is something that has to change. And I hope we can explore that during the course of today. Thank you.
Thank you. Good. Thank you, Apostolos. Dimitris, following along on what Apostolos has said, which is very, I certainly agree with you. It's very thought-provoking. Before I left the United States last week, I attended a conference in New York, and one of the participants got up and said, well, you know that none of the ballast water treatment systems that has been type approved actually works. Now, I realize the experts here might disagree with this completely. I was absolutely floored when I heard that. In light of that statement, true or false, correct or incorrect, if that turns out to be, and remember, we're all veterans, or many of us are, of what happened with oil water separators, where you had the convention before you had the technology. My question for you, Dimitris, is technology development moving too fast? What do you think?
Good morning to everyone. It's morning time, and this is a difficult question because I think the new framework is a little bit chaotic. At the same time, it is a crucial question in a difficult era in the demanding field of shipping, and definitely we have to find ways to cope with new challenges, all these new regulations that we listened before. And also at the same time to try to find ways to create new value in an already squeezed market that has suffered a lot the last decade. How can we create new value? We have to see all the chain. We see that we are moving from the smart ship towards smart shipping. What does it mean? It means that we cannot work together alone anymore. So we have to apply some combined efforts. Now, why we need technology? We need technology because it is our tool to manage this new target. It is something that we need to apply in our companies, in our new structures, to have some positive results. We have many challenges. IT systems, communication development, digitization, a lot of things, Internet of Things, blockchain, sorry. So now it is time to ask the question, is technology moves fast? Yes, I think yes. It moves faster than employees can adopt in the companies. And why this? Because there is no adequate preparation, there is no adequate systems in the companies and structures. And what is the result of this? I see two options here. One is that some companies, they try to, some people in general, not companies, it is a human element. They try to downgrade this. They try to leave it for later, to avoid, to postpone. It's not time to apply technology. We have to stay with the conventional ways. We have tried them in the past and they were successful. But today, what was successful in the past is not a guarantee for the future. So yes, technology runs fast. And companies, unfortunately, do not take the full advantage of this. It's not an easy task. But what can we do in order to be, let's say, in coincidence with this development, in order to get the full advantage from this development? I think that companies have to develop, to invest, first of all, not only the hardware systems. This is something that, for me, it's not the first thing. It is the human element. First, we need specialists. We need people that they will play the new role. We need to combine the traditional way of doing things with modern approaches. And for this reason, we need specialists, analysts, project engineers with wider views, that they will accomplish the new tasks and work together with the experienced chief engineers and masters and bring the results that we need. Of course, we need to invest to the hardware. That is, everybody knows. But I would like just to mention here the human element again, because it is not so simple as it sounds. Last year, we ran a SWOT analysis about the technology impact. We believe that the results will be amazing, will be fabulous, but instead of finding only positive things, to our surprise, we noted more than 30 negative points that are related to the technology impact in the shipping company. And most of them were related with the human element and the psychological side of people. Because there is anxiety for the unknown, there is a hesitation to adopt new structures, and all these things that most probably are known to you. So I think that most important is to invest in this part, to train our people, to enhance a new culture in order to be able to cope with these challenges. And I close stating that we need special attention because there are so many ideas out there, so many new products out there, fast development, and we have to be very careful to avoid a chaotic mess. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dimitrios. They're not anything to change.
And now we are going to hear from Dimitris, Mr. Fafalios. We've gone back and forth, haven't we, on the question of whether ballast water treatment, which I referred to before, where we're headed. Are we headed over a cliff? Can industry meet the challenge of the various requirements for ballast water treatment, including the law, meaning the law as imposed by the state of California, by the United States of America, by the European Union, by the IMO, and as the British say, Uncle Tom Cobley. In addition to those things, the enforcement of the technology. What do you think? Do you agree with the statement I made before? And remember, what I said before was a quotation. It wasn't necessarily my opinion as to what I think is going to happen with ballast water treatment systems. But from where you sit, Mr. Fafalios, and you're very experienced, what do you think is going to happen? Look at your crystal ball, and remember, we're not going to hold it against you if you turn out to be wrong.
Thank you, Clay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you to Capital Link. The question that you pose is extremely relevant, and I think that we can probably sum it up in one word, which is uncertainty. Despite the fact that this convention initially came into force in 2004, 13 years later, we are still facing great uncertainty. And the way that this can be tackled, I think, has to be at several levels. Of course, it has to be tackled at the shipping company level, but I think we have to take it one level higher, and we have to continue our dialogue with the regulators in order to create the most practical solutions possible. If we go to the technology in this particular area of ballast water treatment is essentially land-based technology, which has been marinized in perhaps a less than optimum way. I think even 13 years later, and remember, we faced quite the goalposts have been changing quite often. People say, well, we've known this since 2004. Well, not exactly. In 2004, we had the IMO Ballast Water Treatment Convention, and in 2012, we had the United States requirements. In 2016, IMO revised its G8 guidelines, and the way that we're going, if we look forward to 2019, we may even have further changes. So the management or the flexibility to meet these changes are really paramount. Some time ago, we thought that the problem was going to be that we didn't have enough dry dock space to convert the whatever it is, 60,000 vessels in the world. In fact, now we're seeing new challenges. We're seeing challenges that the manufacturers are not sure that they can produce enough systems. The manufacturers are facing great issues in terms of supporting these systems, whether it's service or spares or commissioning. And of course, the shipping companies themselves have to create a new training regime for the engineers on board who are going to operate these systems, and so that these systems are operated correctly, efficiently, and that the people on board can demonstrate to the port state control officers who will be coming on board and taking samples, and again, that's another area of uncertainty, that the systems are working correctly and as they should, and as it said in the type approval document. Now, you're very right, the type approval document does not guarantee that the systems are going to work. And there is still huge uncertainty. The American type approval, the US type approval system is more rigorous. IMO has followed suit with the revised G8 guidelines, but then there's still a large number of vessels afloat which have systems which are neither US Coast Guard approved nor G8 revised G8 approved. So uncertainty. I think we are facing with this convention and with others, we're facing uncertainty, and we're facing uncertainty because the technology is land-based. The way forward would be, I truly believe, would be for the organizations of the Round Table, ICS, INTERTANKO, INTERCARGO, BIMCO, to speak to the manufacturers of this equipment, and to persuade them to form an association, an organization with as many members as possible. And once this association is formed, hopefully quickly, then I believe that the round table can have discussions with this organization, and then we will get fast-track, practical approaches and solutions to this problem. Thank you.
Now that I see Admiral Fagan has returned to the room, and we often have done this in the past to each other, but I'm not going to put you on the spot, Admiral. Don't worry. Somebody else will have to do that. But if, as it may be, and please understand, I am not speaking ex cathedra as an official of the Marshall Islands Registry. I'm just plain old Clay Maitland right now. But I would like to suggest and ask you a little bit of a follow-up on this, Dimitrios. What if it turns out that we are sort of going off the cliff in a way? And it turns that because, frankly, it's like what British Rail used to have the problem, the wrong kind of snow or the wrong kind of leaves with the responsibility because of the delays in the commute in and out of London. If we end up with ballast water treatments that are not suitable for purpose, but which we thought were, the train wreck, if you will, to take the railroad metaphor one step further, with regard to port state control, it has the potential for being, as they say in Washington, huge. And not only you may want to say something about that, Dimitris, but also Bill and Tom, as sort of our technical experts. Not that you're the only ones, but we may be heading into a situation where we're going to have some very, very real technical and environmental problems in terms of both the enforcement and what do you do if the treatments that are being applied, both in terms of chemicals and in terms of the actual engineering features of a treatment system, turn out not to work in certain circumstances. The potential for a real political disaster for the industry and for the IMO is very real. I'll start with you, Dimitris, and I just want to ask you this, and I realize this is not a part of the script, but it is in a way, because I think that the situation with regard to ballast water treatments going forward, and the hints now that we're beginning to get, and I'm beginning to hear, that all is not well, and it's not just going to be a cut and dried situation of you got your type approval, you install or you build new buildings with an appropriate system. It's going to be much, much more difficult than we thought. And I may be wrong about this, but what do you think? What do we do then? What does the industry do then?
Thank you, Clay. Well, this really was a convention that was really made for new buildings. Retrofitting existing vessels is going to pose huge, huge technical and operational problems. And in fact, there's going to be a huge amount of money spent with very little return, or especially in terms of the retrofits. In terms of enforcement, the primary line obviously is through the actions and the actions and the reactions of port state control. And we still at IMO we still don't have a ballast water sample testing procedure agreed and finalized. And then this will then impose port state control training programs, experience, sample taking, analysis at reliable laboratories, etc. But I think that we just have to keep fighting to make this a more practical application. And until then, because we're also facing multiple legal frameworks within the port state controls. Unfortunately, it's uncertainty, and for the owners, it's a very, very substantial investment in training, in equipment, and to have spent all of this money on equipment and still be uncertain that the system will not work because we didn't take exactly the right type of water which was used at the type approval stage. I think this is where pragmatism is needed, and pragmatism will only exist when the round table and the regulators really, and the manufacturers, sit down and talk and see how we can improve things. Otherwise, I don't want to be a sensationalist, a sort of train wreck, but that's where we're going. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dimitrios. Yes, Bill, that's why we're setting you up.
No, having been set up there, I mean 2 words, and I think the battle at IMO is now fought on ballast water management. It is what it is. And what we would fight for on behalf of our members is consistent enforcement. It's, as Dimitris says, it's uncertain. We need consistency and realism in the enforcement by port state control.
I certainly agree. And INTERTANKO is in the midst of that. But again, you and I have discussed this. One of the factors when we talk about this particular issue, as with so many others, is the fact that the industry is coming off a 10-year recession, really the most severe recession in my experience in the industry, which, as I say, goes back nearly half a century. So it's been a very, very bad 10 years for most of us. And the biggest contributor to those bad 10 years was the enormous overtonnaging in many sectors of the industry. You and I have talked about next time will be different. It's going to be different from now on. We're not going to overbuild. You might want to look at, in your answer to this question, the question is, do you feel that next time will be different, or that we're going to make the same mistake over again? And if so, do you think that the environmental constraints that we're talking about, and notably the great uncertainty on the treatment of ballast water and port state control, will have an impact either constraining overtonnaging or contributing to it? I know that's a stupid question. I can tell it's a stupid question. It's a very poorly articulated one. But I'm looking at all these things coming together, and I think we all are on this panel, and thinking, well, you know, how, if we have serious problems with port state control and with ballast water treatment technologically, what, with the number of new buildings that are coming on them, still being, that are on stream or coming on stream, how do you think that will affect your members? Will there be a tendency to hold back?
Thank you for this opportunity to address this very distinguished audience here. And I would like to say, talking on boom and bust, which is what we're talking about, I have to say I'm not going to give you an INTERTANKO voice on this, because it's not appropriate for INTERTANKO to have an opinion, I think, on boom and bust. However, I will try to give you the benefit of 40 years of observations, which started in 1973 when I was a young port agent in France, and it was the very end of one of the biggest booms ever. The sad thing is I didn't really appreciate that at the time when I was 18. However, will next time be different? Maybe, maybe not. But what I would like to do today is just look at some facts. Fact: the peak order book in 2007-2008 coincided with peak spot and one-year time charter rates. Fact: peak order book in 2015-2016 coincided with another peak in rates. Yes, too often short-term freight market movements do influence long-term investment decisions. However, fact: 1st of January through to the end of this year, so actual and estimated, 160 tankers have delivered and will deliver. 36 tankers removed or scrapped. Fact, Baltic Dirty Tanker Index in January this year, 1,000. By the end of August, it had slipped to 629. Okay, the good news is it's now recovered to around 750. So why do tanker owners do it? Why do ship owners do it? Why invest? Because there is an industry to maintain. Because also everyone remembers the last big rate boom, when earnings for one voyage might have been $180,000 a day. So a profit of $4 million a month per ship. If, and it's a huge if, every ship were to hit the sweet spot for a full month. And that's the trouble with boom. Boom is short-lived, and that's my last fact. Boom times don't last. Welcome to the tanker business. Tanker owners live in hope. Tanker owners are optimists. But tanker owners are also realists. You have sky-high earnings. You may reinvest in modern ships, or you may carefully stash funds away for a rainy day. Because there will be rainy days that always follow boom times. And stashing cash away ensures that the tough times that will come after a boom don't mean bust.
Thank you, Bill. We'll get back to you, and I hope we'll have a few more. We may have to demand a little bit of extra time or request it. But Tom, you've been given sort of the job of cleaning up, the confusion that I have sown. But if you could comment on some of the things that you've heard, particularly on ballast water treatments, maybe on how the Classification Society you have seen. You've seen your share of boom and bust, mostly bust. What do you think? Do you agree with Bill?
Well, thank you very much, Clay, and I, like the other speakers, really welcome the opportunity to address this audience, and I'll explain why in a moment. Frankly, I had my experience of boom and bust before I entered classification. My first 30 years was spent in the container shipping industry, which, as many of you well know, thankfully, maybe many of you are not involved in it, in which case you're probably rich enough still to be able to observe it, has gone through the most terrible and life-changing consolidation process. So what we see today is probably nearly the end game in terms of the container lines, container ship owning. But what I wanted to talk about a little bit, because when Clay and Nick asked me to talk about where we see the future and the future roadmap, I think it's always quite useful to look back. Unlike Bill, I'm not going to look back to 1973, when I was enjoying myself at school, but certainly to 2009, when I joined Lloyd's Register, in the aftermath of the global financial crisis, when it was an existential crisis certainly for quite a few of the container lines. And then reflecting what I've seen in the last 8 years, and for me, the biggest innovations haven't been in technology. In fact, technology has moved relatively slowly in the shipping industry. When I look at some of the ships that have been ordered this year compared to the ships that were ordered in 2009, it's almost a game of spot the difference. Not a great deal. And by the way, that's not a criticism, that's simply an observation. But where I've seen the real innovation is in the way that shipping is funded. And in addition, what I've seen is a consolidation of the expertise. And I think the reason why Greece is vying with China for the leadership spot in terms of world influence and world ownership is because increasingly expertise in shipping is largely contained in this city and possibly even in this room. So my reflection to you is if you can't find the answer in here, I don't know where you're going to look for the answer, because in terms of operating expertise, I think probably Athens Piraeus is the global centre. But that innovation has been incredible. People thought, how on earth can the order boom of 13 and the more recent mini boom have been funded? And the answer is the global financial crisis meant there was lots of money, and cheap money, looking for a home. And those people with that money settled on Greece as the place to invest in shipping, which is why I think a combination of global money and Greek ownership and expertise has left probably the biggest innovation I've seen in 8 years is the change in the ownership structure. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the geopolitics going forward and how will that change. Well, clearly everyone expected China to be more influential, and that part of the story has come true. And so what we see today is strong shipbuilding, although having been through a major dry clean, which has sorted out some of the weaker from the stronger players. The Chinese, and I hadn't expected this, have gone big time for consolidation of their own shipping industry, with now maybe 2 or 3 giants, and very well funded giants, and with their own building planned. And I expect that we see that story will continue, and I don't see how that will change. So the question is, who were the losers if China won and Greece won? Well, I think you see them elsewhere in Europe and in other parts of the world, where you used to talk about the various shipping capitals of the world. Well, that list of shipping capitals is diminishing, and there are now fewer and more prominent centres. My last 12 months has actually been spent on sort of less marine and more in other industries, where Lloyd's Registries is trying to apply the skills and its expertise in the shipping industry in terms of verification, certification, and advising people on how to meet regulation. And I would give you a degree, if it's only a crumb of comfort, is if you look in the auto industry, their problems with the regulation compliance has been huge. And if we're looking for how to implement a regulation, you could have argued that everyone who drove a Volkswagen should have stopped driving it on the day they discovered that the emissions regulations and the software had been fixed. But that was hardly a practical solution. It would have meant that millions of people would have lost their mobility overnight. And so politically, a totally unacceptable solution. When we look at the construction industry and the environmental performance of modern buildings, nowhere near what was promised. Again, a combination of lax regulation or lax monitoring of regulation has meant that in many parts of the world our global building stock is not as environmentally performing as it should do. Again, a political problem, but what do? Do you evacuate all those buildings and demolish them? Of course you don't. You try and figure out why the regulation didn't work or why the monitoring didn't work. So what I'd say about shipping, and I wouldn't wish to diminish any of these challenges, but I think all owners can do is do the best they can according to the information they have at the time. I hope that in the court of natural justice over a period of time, when the port state control or other people come on board, that a ship owner will be able to document that they took what they thought were the correct decisions following the regulation at the time. And we've already seen there the evidence of that taking place, and I think we'll continue to have to do it. For me, I think the big issue is actually the global sulfur cap, 0.5 in 2020. Are we going to ask the bunker industry to effectively police the shipping industry by refusing to sell non-compliant fuel to ships that don't have scrubbers? In the same way that in the UK they ask news agents not to sell alcohol or cigarettes to under 18-year-olds. To begin with, people were using their father or their mother's driving license to purchase the alcohol and cigarettes, but over a period of time, enforcement sort of tightened things up. And I think clearly between the bunker industry and the shipping industry, something has to happen in order for that sort of enforcement to take place. Otherwise, the temptation not to comply becomes too great. So I think in a sort of a mixture of reflections, I'd say the issues that the shipping industry are faced by everyone else, and I assure you other industries haven't found the magic bullet either. It's a question of working with the regulators and the enforcers to make sure that whatever happens is done practically. No one has an interest in stopping world shipping, but we do have an interest in rooting out those who are deliberately trying to bend the rules for commercial gain. Thank you.
With the permission of Nick, can we solicit a few questions from the audience? We're running out of time, I realize, but we have run out of time. Are there any questions? Anything? Yes, sir. Gentleman here.
Have a mic or shall I shout?
You can shout. I don't see any microphone. Or you can come up here.
That's fine. Economic life of vessels has been historically based on life expectancy of the hull. Rapid evolution of propulsion systems is creating technological obsolescence. Other regulatory restrictions also accelerate this process. As a result, our accounting standards understate real depreciation. This in turn creates unrealistic returns on capital and projections of profits. When will depreciation standards change?
That's a question for accountants. This is not an accountants panel. Should I rule that out of order? Anybody want to take a crack at that? You're all the shipping industry. I don't see any takers. I think you've got the wrong conference as well as the wrong panel, sir. But it's a good question. Does somebody want to?
Well, I would just say that although people say that the life expectation or expectancy of ships maybe is getting shorter because it's not the hull but it's the machinery. And for those of you who own cars, you probably know too well that they're designed obviously to start breaking at 10 years when the body is still good for probably another 10 or 15. But that was a deliberate decision by the industry. I don't think shipbuilders are doing that to ships. I don't think it's clear that the ship won't last for 25 years. The question is, clearly some of the components will have to be changed. And we've seen that. But we see with the lack of scrapping at the moment is that it's largely commercial reasons that will lead to ships being scrapped, not technical ones.
Yes, please.
I agree. We're looking here not at the life expectancy of a ship, we're looking at the economic life of a ship. So if you look at, to take tanker owners, I know the tanker industry. Forgive me for focusing on them, but tanker owners invest in ships with a 25-year life. They're in the peculiar situation where tanker vetting by oil companies says that basically after 15 years, in one or two cases less, your ship is not preferred anymore. So really the decisions the owner is making is you may have a ship built for 25, 30 years, but actually its economic life starts getting much trickier when it's halfway through its design life.
So, Dr. Stavropoulos, is that helpful?
Very helpful. Thank you.
We're not done yet. We have one more comment.
No, just to add to that, fundamentally this is market-driven. So, what we've seen is over the past decade and more, a very large oversupply of vessels, and it's a natural, let's say, evolution that the oil majors, the charterers, will apply more filters, more screening, apply overage criteria. This overage criteria are even at 15 years old now. So I think this is something which has come with the over-ordering, with simply the higher volume of ships compared to the cargoes available. And yeah, we are all at fault for this at the end of the day. Now, of course, there is a correction. Hopefully this correction is going to continue. And we will see a softening, let's say, of this supply-demand gap. But I don't think that oil major practices are going to get any softer. I think quite the opposite, and I think this is also going to go into other sectors. We're seeing it already in the container industry, dry bulk, and so on. So if we're talking about operational excellence, which is the whole theme of today, and what we've been hearing so far on this panel, Clay, I don't know what you think, but it's far from excellent in terms of what is ahead of us. All the different operational issues which are arising from applying new technology in a practical manner. And I think what we haven't heard so far is all the safety risk. Let's not forget that. The safety risk which comes from applying more environmental regulations.
Well, with that thought, I think this is a good time to yield the floor to the next panel. We're 5 minutes and plus overtime. Let's give a round of applause, please. Thank you.